It is 08:47 on the morning of May 27th, 1941, somewhere in the frigid grey swells of the North Atlantic. The air smells of diesel smoke and salt spray, thick enough to taste. Metal groans under the strain of 18-inch shells slamming into steel plating. Men shout orders that are swallowed instantly by the roar of gunfire. Somewhere below decks, in the belly of the German battleship Bismarck, a small black-and-white cat presses himself into a dark corner, ears flat, claws dug into a coil of rope. As the largest warship in the German Navy begins to die around him. He has no name yet, no rank, no records, no official mention in any ship's log. He is simply the ship's cat, a common companion aboard vessels of every navy, kept to hunt rats and unofficially to calm the nerves of frightened young sailors far from home. Nobody watching him that morning could have imagined that this one animal would go on to survive not one, not two, but 3 separate warship sinkings in a single year of the deadliest naval conflict in human history. To understand how he got there, we have to go back further to the story of the ship carrying him. Bismarck was the pride of Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine, commissioned in August 1940, a 50,000-ton behemoth built to dominate the Atlantic shipping lanes and strangle Britain's lifeline of supplies. She was fast, heavily armored, and in the eyes of German naval command, nearly invincible. British intelligence saw her differently, as the single greatest threat to the convoys keeping Britain fed and armed during the darkest years of the war. In May 1941, Bismarck slipped out of occupied Norway alongside the cruiser Prince Eugen, aiming to break into the Atlantic and hunt Allied merchant ships. What followed was one of the most intense naval pursuits in history. She sank the British battlecruiser HMS Hood within minutes of engaging her, killing all but 3 of her 1,418 crew. It was a national catastrophe for Britain, and it triggered an immediate, relentless manhunt across the ocean, involving battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers, all converging on a single target. Somewhere among Bismarck's crew of over 2,000 men was this unnamed cat, fed scraps in the galley, tolerated by officers, adopted quietly by the lower decks. He had no idea, of course, that within days he would be swimming for his life in freezing water, or that British sailors from a very different navy were about to become his unlikely rescuers. What happened next would become one of the strangest survival stories to come out of the entire war, a story of an animal who, through nothing but chance, kept finding himself aboard the wrong ship at exactly the wrong moment. And somehow, every single time he lived, that story begins with the guns of the Royal Navy closing in from every direction. By the morning of May 27, 1941, Bismarck was surrounded. The British battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney closed in, pounding her with shell after shell, while cruisers and destroyers circled like wolves. For nearly 2 hours, the German battleship absorbed a relentless bombardment. Her superstructure was reduced to twisted wreckage. Fires raged below decks. And still, deep inside that dying ship, the cat clung to whatever shelter he could find, surrounded by smoke, screaming metal, and men who no longer had time to notice him. Bismarck finally slipped beneath the waves that morning, taking more than 2,000 of her crew down with her. Only 114 men were pulled alive from the freezing water, plucked from the wreckage by British ships, including the destroyer HMS Cossack. And floating among the debris, clinging to a piece of wooden planking, was the cat. British sailors, stunned to find a half-drowned animal bobbing in the Atlantic in the middle of a war, hauled him aboard. They dried him off, fed him, and with the dark humor common to sailors who had just witnessed mass death, named him Oscar, a survivor of Germany's mightiest warship, now serving under the enemy's flag. Here's where the story takes its first strange turn. Cossack wasn't just any destroyer. She'd already made headlines the year before for a daring raid, rescuing British prisoners from a German supply ship. Now she had a new passenger, one who, it seemed, had a peculiar talent for outliving warships. For months, Oscar lived aboard Cossack, patrolling the deck, hunting rats, quietly becoming part of the crew. But the Atlantic in 1941 was no safe place for any vessel flying an Allied flag. German U-boats hunted convoys constantly, submerged predators waiting for the right moment to strike. On October 24, 1941, while escorting a convoy near Gibraltar, Cossack was struck by a torpedo fired from U-563. The explosion tore through the forward section of the ship, killing 159 men instantly. The destroyer was crippled, taken under tow, but days later, in heavy seas, she broke apart and sank. Once again, Oscar was pulled from the wreckage. Once again, he had survived. Word of the cat began to spread through the fleet. Sailors are, by nature, superstitious. And a cat who had now survived 2 sinkings on 2 different navies' ships was the kind of story that traveled fast. Some called it luck. Others, half-joking, wondered if he was cursed or blessed, depending on which ship you were standing on. Oscar was transferred to Gibraltar and eventually found a new home aboard one of the most famous aircraft carriers in the Royal Navy, HMS Ark Royal. Ark Royal had already survived multiple U-boat attacks, air raids, and had played a critical role in the very hunt that sank Bismarck months earlier. Sailors joked that with Oscar aboard, nothing could touch her. They were about to find out just how wrong that assumption was. On November 13, 1941, Ark Royal was steaming back toward Gibraltar after delivering aircraft to Malta. Her crew relaxed, many already thinking of hot meals and solid ground. Then, just after 4 p.m., a single torpedo from the German submarine U-81 slammed into her starboard side. The explosion tore a massive hole below the waterline, flooding her boiler rooms and cutting power throughout the ship. Lights failed, pumps stopped. Within minutes, one of the Royal Navy's most celebrated carriers was listing badly, taking on water she had no way to expel. For the next several hours, engineers and damage control crews fought desperately to save her, wading through flooding compartments in near-total darkness, trying to coax dying engines back to life. It was a slow, agonizing death for the ship, nothing like the violent, sudden end of Bismarck or Cossack. Ark Royal rolled further and further onto her side through the night, until finally, in the early hours of November 14th, she capsized and sank just 30 miles from Gibraltar. Remarkably, only 1 man was lost in the sinking, thanks largely to the extended time crews had to evacuate. And once again, pulled from the deck, plucked from disaster for a 3rd time, was Oscar. By now, his story had become impossible to ignore. 3 warships, 3 sinkings, 2 different navies, all within the space of about 6 months. Sailors who had once laughed about the curse now spoke of him almost with reverence or wariness. Whatever ship carried Oscar next, the thinking went, had better be prepared for the worst. Naval authorities, only half joking themselves, decided enough was enough. Oscar was given a new nickname that would stick in the history books forever, Unsinkable Sam. And rather than tempt fate a 4th time, he was quietly retired from active service at sea. Sam was sent to Belfast, then eventually to Gibraltar's Governor-General's residence, where he spent the remainder of his days on solid, unshaking ground, safe, fed. And finally free of the sound of tearing metal and freezing water. He lived out a long, peaceful life on land, reportedly passing away around 1955, more than a decade after the war that had defined his strange legend finally ended. It's easy to laugh at the story of a cat surviving 3 shipwrecks, and sailors of the time certainly did, using dark humor to cope with the staggering losses happening all around them. But underneath, the legend is something quietly profound. Thousands of men died aboard Bismarck, Cossack, and Ark Royal. Sam's survival was pure chance, nothing more, yet his story became a small, strange thread of comfort in an ocean of loss, a reminder that amid the worst of human conflict, something small and undeserving of the horror around it could still, somehow, make it through. Perhaps that's why his story still gets told today, not really about a cat, but about survival itself, and the human need to find meaning, even luck, in the chaos of war. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments which ship's tale surprised you most. And stay tuned for more true stories the history books almost forgot.